one of the things that we need to do in order to affect culture, which I've said is behavior, is if I train you to communicate effectively when there's no stress, then in the new circumstances where there is stress, all that training goes right out the window.
This podcast is brought to you by Hey Taco, the only peer-to-peer recognition platform that uses tacos to help teams around the world share gratitude. I'm Doug.
I'm Una.
This is our podcast, Amazing Teams. Aaron Schmookler, welcome to the Amazing Teams podcast.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Aaron Schmookler is the co-founder and CEO of YesWorks, a consulting firm specializing in training and support for world-class collaboration so companies can boost profitability, magnetize top talent, and love work. At YesWorks, Aaron and his team developed the innovative Teamification culture operating system and training module, which they employ to drive communication, collaboration, and leadership within client companies such as Microsoft, Mod Pizza, and Discover.org, to name a few. Aaron, did I miss anything?
So much, nothing at all. If any one of us could be encapsulated in the 30 seconds or whatever it was that you just read, then life would be a lot less interesting.
Very true. This is why we're recording this, so we can learn all the things in between these lines that I just read.
All right.
But Aaron, to get us started right into amazing teams, what do you think it takes to build an amazing team in 140 characters or less?
Oh, man. What does it take? It takes ridiculous amounts of determination, I think, is what it takes.
That's great. I've seen you refer to yourself as a culture engineer. What does it mean to you to be a culture engineer, and how does that role differ from traditional approaches to organizational development?
All right. Thank you for that question. I live in Washington State, not far from Tacoma. And if you're at all familiar with the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, you might have heard of Galloping Gertie. Galloping Gertie is a cautionary tale told to engineering students. So they built this bridge from Tacoma to Gig Harbor, this big, long, beautiful suspension bridge. And you may have seen the video where decades and decades ago now, I don't even remember how long ago, a wind came up. And because of that wind blowing across this bridge, turned the bridge essentially into a guitar string. And the thing vibrated at just the perfect resonance so that it galloped, it undulated, and shook itself to pieces. The bridge collapsed, not under the strain of weight, but under the strain of vibrations that nobody anticipated. So what is company culture engineering? Well, there are all of these interdependent forces at work shaping the way people behave in your organization. That behavior may be glorious collaboration and glorious teamwork, or that behavior may be conflict and information hoarding and things of that kind. And so the question for leaders out there is, are you aware of the hidden forces at work shaping those behaviors? And are you on your way to the Tacoma Narrows Bridge of today that has been standing for decades and decades? Or are you on your way to undulating through hidden forces into shaking yourself to pieces and falling into the sound? I don't think I answered the whole of your question. We're looking at those hidden forces at the YesWorks along with business leaders and their teams. We're helping shape the kinds of structures that are going to build and create the environment for great culture. And then we're also giving people the skills to behave in pro-social, pro-communicative, pro-collaborative, pro-performance ways so that they are greater than the sum of their parts.
Got it. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your journey and what inspired you to start the YesWorks?
Sure. My daughter just turned 10 on Thursday. So it must have been over 10 years ago that I was doing work that I loved in a job that I hated when my wife told me she was pregnant. You know, like it does for all first-time parents. It's like my scales were lifted from my eyes. My whole perspective on the world changed. And I thought, my daughter cannot inherit the work culture that I have come up in. There's so much of people finding affinity together through I Hate Monday mugs and TGIF bumper stickers and watching the clock and same shit, different day, all these kinds of things that we say, another day, another dollar, all these things that we say. It's unacceptable that my daughter should inherit that work culture. And so I've got about 10 years left to transform work culture. What I've discovered since starting this company, there's a company culture revolution happening And we're just a part of it. And the great grace of this mission that I'm on to change work culture for my daughter also means that we're touching people's lives. We spend so much time at work that I just feel so fueled by the fact that we're improving people's work lives. We've trained hundreds, if not thousands of people in this 10 years. We've improved people's work lives all along the way. And then also, by great fortune, we're improving the performance of the companies that they work for so that those companies can continue to provide them with great work lives and meet their business goals.
Got it. I have to ask because I've seen it on, I believe it was your LinkedIn page, but a mention of outdoor leadership. I'm kind of curious what that is. Can you give us a little peek behind the curtain of what you mean by outdoor leadership?
Yeah. So my first job after high school was at a summer camp, and I was leading kids through wilderness experiences, backpacking trips, canoe trips. I worked there for years and years, eventually training the new staff that would come in and continue this. I will never forget my first summer leading kids on a backpacking trip. I don't know how they ended up on a backpacking trip. They kind of maybe they drew the short straw. And I remember the first trip I took, we got maybe 2 miles from the trailhead, and we're headed up the mountain, and it's getting a little steep. And one girl just sat down and she said, "I'm not going any further." And I tried encouraging her, and I tried cajoling her, and I tried getting all of her peers to cajole her. And she said things like, "Do you know who my dad is? When we get back, my dad's gonna this and my dad's gonna that." I tried asking her, like, what's the alternative? If you hike 2 miles back down the mountain to the trailhead, the bus is gone. I don't know when the next car is going to go by. There's no guarantee that a car is going to go by today. Like, you'll just be stranded there. If we leave you here, there's no place to pitch a tent. Here we're on the side of a mountain. I tried everything and nothing worked until I gave up. And I just said, all right, like, I got to go just think. And I walked away. When I looked back some minutes later, her peers, other kids, had her backpack open, and they were taking stuff out of it and putting it into their own backpack. This is backpacking on the Appalachian Trail, mind you. She had a hairdryer, which I don't know, she was planning to plug it into a tree or something. One of her peers even took that and put her hairdryer in their own backpack and gave her back her empty backpack. And she started up the mountain. And I don't know how much physically easier it was, but she had been emotionally, maybe spiritually transformed and was ready to take on the challenge again. And there was no amount of leading that I could do that was going to get her up that mountain. So my understanding of what leadership was changed that day.
I bet it did. The weight of her own bag, I guess, was holding her down.
The weight of her own bag was holding her down. And I think feeling alone, right, is like what happened that afternoon was that she was no longer alone. She was not climbing this mountain with all of this stuff on her own. Her peers had come and proven to her that she wasn't on her own. This was the first of 5 days. The rest of those 5 days, she carried stuff. I don't know that she ever got up to kind of having a full pack again. That was the only hike that we took on that trip where she had an empty pack. So that proof of I'm not in this alone meant she could take on more than she thought.
Aaron, how has what you learned that day about leadership affected how you approach coaching leaders today?
I'm really glad that you asked how it changed my approach to coaching leaders today rather than how I lead, because I think like everybody, I sometimes forget the lessons I've learned. I tell that story. You can probably hear that. This is not the first time I've told it. You know, coaching leaders is all about, very often anyway, about not giving them the answer, but shifting their perspective. You know, nobody gave her the answer. Nobody carried her. They just shifted her perspective. And so one of my jobs as a friend, as a counselor, sometimes as a coach, as a consultant, as a trainer to leaders, is to just provide an opportunity to step out of what you think you understand and to just look at whatever the picture from another angle. That, and to reinforce for them the experience that they're already having, that wagging your finger at people and telling them what to do will sometimes get you obedience. It will never get you enrollment. She got enrolled. She got enrolled in the idea that she could make it to the destination. She was not ever going to be obedient. She was not ever going to be compliant. Instead, her peers and managed to enroll her. And so one of the shifts that really great leaders make is into this idea that when people are enrolled, and Simon Sinek's Start With Why is a part of this, right? When people are enrolled, they will conquer mountains. They will carry mountains. They will move mountains in order to accomplish what they're enrolled in, where they will thumb their nose at you when you try to get them to be obedient.
Aaron, going back to your company, the YesWorks, I'm curious around the meaning of the YesWorks.
Sometimes constraints are the greatest help to creativity. I remember sitting down with my co-founder, must be 10 years ago, and coming up with all kinds of names that we loved, and we couldn't get the URL. And so I think we were tremendously fortunate that all those URLs were not available, because I can now not think of a single name that would be better than the YesWorks. So one thing, among the things that we do with our clients is we train them to use some of the principles that theater improvisers and other improvisers use. The most famous and horribly misunderstood principle from improvisation is yes and, which people think means I've got to agree with even your shittiest ideas. It doesn't mean that at all, right? If you and I are trying to end world hunger, I think it was Swift, there was a satirical piece on how to end the famine in Ireland. And he said, oh, well, there are too many babies, so let's eat babies. The piece is called An Immodest Proposal, Jonathan Swift. That's a terrible idea. Nobody's going to say yes to that. Are there ways to say yes that aren't agreement? If you think about yes is validation, then of course there are, right? Oh, this idea that maybe part of the problem is population numbers. That leads me to the thought that maybe contraception would be valuable in ending the famine, or at least mitigating its effect. Also, the idea that eating something that we don't now think of as food, that might be a contributor. And what that makes me think of is we're an island. Is there seaweed that we've never thought of as food before that might be edible? That is yes and. So that's where part of it comes from, is this idea, yes and, the yes works. Also, it's a true statement. Yes works in ways that no doesn't. No will lead to struggle. Yes can get you through and beyond and around struggle. Also, one of the things that I love about the name, the YesWorks, is it conjures for me the idea of public utilities, right? The water works, the electric works. So we are out there cranking out yes and helping our clients crank out yes. This is an engine of yes.
That might explain why we noticed that a lot of your team members have the title engineer next to whatever they're engineering, right? Workplace engineer, culture engineer, as you said. Yeah. Sounds like it's rooted in what you just said.
Absolutely. I hope, and it's, even though it's kind of aggregated a piece at a time, I hope that our brand coheres.
Let's switch gears here and talk about teamification. And I have to admit, when I hear the word teamification, in the back of my brain, I hear Red Hot Chili Peppers, I guess the Californication song. Can you tell our listeners about teamification, please?
Sure. We take our clients through one or more of the following three phases. Phase one in teamification is we call prepare the soil, because an orchid won't grow in the desert. You've got to have rich soil. You've got to have structures in your company that are going to support the kind of behaviors that you want. And culture is behavior. So structures include things like policies and our employee handbook. There are lots of companies that I've gone into. The CEO says, or the owner says, we've got a trust problem. Trust is one of our core values, and people don't trust each other. And I need to understand why. And I look at the employee handbook, and it says, we don't trust you as far as we can throw you, in no uncertain terms on every page, including, and this is a policy, a real policy that I saw, when you get back from bereavement leave, maybe your mother has died, maybe your grandmother has died. When you get back from bereavement leave, please bring us an obituary or a death certificate to prove that that's where you've been. So when you're exhibiting that much distrust just on paper, and very often those policies, nobody made that policy. They just bought a handbook, right? They got a handbook, a generic handbook online, or they asked their HR team or they asked their HR consultant, give us a handbook. And that's just what came off the shelf. And even though it's only structural, it has a profound impact on culture. So that's one of the pieces of structure. Another piece of structure, the CEO who said, I've got great people working on the front lines and I've got great people managing them. And I don't understand why they're at each other's throats all the time. And it turns out every manager, they've done a great job hiring conscientious managers who are working hard to drive performance. Every manager is managing 15 people. And the science says that a manager can't effectively manage more than 6 to 8 people. When you're working hard to drive performance and you don't have time to build the kind of strong relationship of trust that can support that conscientiousness and that drive for performance, then you're going to end up with conflict. So that's another structural piece. So that's prepare the soil as structure. Water the garden is up to 3 half-day workshops where we plant seeds that are principles of effective communication, collaboration, and leadership, that we plant them deep in the minds of the people that we work with, such that, be obvious is one of those principles. We can get into what that means later. Years later, I've gone back to a client. I'll say something about having trained them to be obvious. And I remember the business owner who said to me, you're where we started saying be obvious. It's part of their shared vernacular now. So we've planted that seed. And when we come back later, very often they've developed tactics that support that principle. So the third phase of our work is water the garden, where we can train you in tactics to accelerate, if you'd like, the growing of those seeds. These are tools for a system for managing people. This is a system for driving an innovation and problem-solving culture. These are tactics for dealing with difficult customers. So we can get really tactical and put flesh on the bones of those principles that we introduced in Plant the Seeds.
Aaron, when you come into a company and you assess and see what is happening, right? There's probably a problem that the CEO tells you about or whoever brings you in, and there's a problem that then you see that they did not necessarily tell you about because they might not see it. What are the most common problems you see teams and organizations facing right now that you're brought in to solve?
Very often we're brought in to solve, say, conflict. And we learn that some of that conflict is about, as a leader of this team, where do we allocate our resources? As a leader of that team, where do we allocate our resources? As a leader of this team, where do we allocate resources? And this is one of the reasons that we have those different engineers on our team page, is that I've got expertise around leadership, communication, collaboration. And there are other folks on our team of engineers who have expertise around operations and things like that. So sometimes that conflict comes because they don't have tight enough systems around operations. And so things slip through the cracks and fingers start getting pointed. So our operations engineer can come in and help you tighten up that operation, and suddenly the conflict goes away. If you couple that with giving people greater skills to communicate and collaborate and digest conflict better, then, oh my gosh, you're off to the races. Sometimes it's because we don't really understand what we as a company exist to do. If you look at a lot of missions, it's like you can look at a plumbing company and you can look at a software company, and you wouldn't know by reading their mission which one is which. Is your mission really getting into the kind of position where it can be a North Star and a compass for everybody so that everybody is pointed in the same direction, right? The more specificity your mission has, the more it helps to align people. So this gives you a little bit of a kind of some of what would come in for conflict, discover that it's not that our people are assholes, it's that they're doing their best within a structure that doesn't quite work.
Aaron, can you share with our listeners any innovative or unconventional methods that you've used to influence and shape culture and what results they've produced?
I've talked about this Plant the Seeds, these 8 principles of effective communication and collaboration. We come in these experiential training programs and we put everybody, up to 30 people at a time, through exercises that seem completely irrelevant, right? People are like, what are we even doing? And then they start to say, oh, wait a second, this is just like work. And these exercises are designed not to scare people or make people uncomfortable, or put people on the spot. Nobody's ever on the spot in our workshops. They are experiencing, however, workplace analogous stress. And I'm a dog trainer. I love training dogs. And one of the things that's marvelous about training a dog is, right, and if you've ever had a dog, you know this is true. You go to the living room, you train the dog to sit. You stay in the living room, you train the dog to sit. The dog gets perfect. And then you go into the dining room and you tell the dog to sit, and the dog stares at you like, what are you talking about? And it's not because the dog is being obstinate. It's because mammals are circumstantial learners. And so people hate it when I compare training people to training dogs, except that we're mammals. We've got a lot of the same brain material going on. So you've got to train the dog in the dining room that sit means sit. And then you've got to train the dog outside that sit means sit. And then you've got to train the dog in an environment with even more intense distractions that sit means sit. And when you get to about the fourth level, the dog goes, oh, I get it. No matter what, no matter where, sit means sit. And then you've got a dog that will sit. So one of the things that we need to do in order to affect culture, which I've said is behavior, is if I train you to communicate effectively when there's no stress, then in the new circumstances where there is stress, all that training goes right out the window. Not because you're a jerk, but because your brain hasn't gone, okay, in all circumstances, this is what effective communication looks and feels like. So we create the circumstance of workplace analogous stress so that your brain will have already begun to generate the habit of, even under stress, this is what effective communication looks and feels like.
Aaron, what's an example of such an exercise? If you could describe it shortly, I'm so curious now.
Okay. This is one of the most simple, stupid, profound exercises that we do. And I have done this with a room full of CEOs, right? 30 CEOs, I get them in a semicircle. And of course, we do this with teams also. All right, so here's how it goes. Una, I'm going to say a word to you. What I want you to do is you're going to look me square in the face. I'm going to look you square in the face and say this word. Let's say the word is tarantula. I'm going to look you square in the face. I'm going to say tarantula. I want you to look me square in the face back and say my word tarantula. Then you're going to say, that makes me think of, and you're going to turn to Doug and you're going to say whatever the word tarantula makes you think of. You're going to look Doug square in the face. Doug is going to be looking you square in the face. Doug is going to repeat your word square in your face. He's going to say, that makes me think of. He's going to turn to the next person and say what that makes them, what that makes him think of. So if I say tarantula, you might say, that makes me think of spider. Doug's going to say spider. That makes me think of web. And we're going to do that all around the circle. Are you with me?
I'm with you. I'm with you.
I want to paint a clear picture. It's incredibly simple. Anybody can do it. Every group fails. And they fail largely when it comes to looking each other in the eyes, right? I look you in the eye and you say web, and I look away. I say web. I'm not looking you straight in the face as you've already promised you would do. As I promised I would do, I don't look you square in the face and say web, and then turn my attention to what I'm going to say, because my anxiety about what I'm going to say means that I cannot spare you the moment to fully acknowledge what you've told me. So we've got this workplace analogous stress. What am I going to say or do? Means that I break the commitment that I have to following this very simple procedure. So that's level one, is am I willing to subjugate my anxiety to the honor and respect that you deserve for me to acknowledge you? That's level one. Level two, I ask everybody in the room to be responsible, and everybody commits. I will be responsible. We are collectively responsible to get this right and to point out any errors so that we can repair them before we move on. And people make that commitment. Yes, I will do it. And then they watch error after error. Some of them don't notice because they're already, even though it's going to be half a minute before this thing gets to me, maybe even a full minute before this thing gets to me, I'm already anxious about what I'm going to say. That's one of the reasons that people don't notice the errors. Other people do notice the errors and they don't say anything because they don't want to take the risk, or they don't want to hurt like, what if I'm wrong that there was an error, right? So I don't want to take the risk of being wrong. And then there's also, I don't want to take the risk of potentially offending you for pointing out an error, which we all know you just made. It's an incredibly powerful exercise and ridiculously stupid and incredibly simple. And we had a CEO we worked with a couple of months ago. He came to us, he said, we're all walking on eggshells. We don't have trust. We're walking on eggshells. We are not telling each other what we need to hear. We went through one half-day workshop that included this exercise. And he said, and his whole leadership team backed up, we are now telling each other what we need to hear. It was as if they flipped a switch. There was a clear before and after. If I give you permission to say, hey, Aaron, you messed up. This is the standard and you did something else. When I give you permission, you are so much more likely to come forward and say, hey, Aaron, you messed up. And one of the things that we neglect to do in our organizations is really profoundly give each other that permission.
That's great. It seems like these workshops are probably very helpful in helping build an amazing team. I'm curious if you have any ideas around sustaining that excellence. What strategies do you have to maintain team morale, motivation, and performance?
There's so much I could say in response to that. And when I start to go down the litany of all the things that you can do to do this, it can be overwhelming for people. Let me start by assuring you that if you do any of these things, it will have a profound impact. One of the things is storytelling. I call storytelling the currency of culture. And currency, both in terms of like, it's the money, right? Is like when we tell stories, that is money. If I tell a story to you, Doug, about how much I appreciate what Una did yesterday, and I'm specific about what her actions were, and I'm specific about why I liked it and what its impact was, then you're going to go, okay, this is a thing that is valued around here. It's a reason that Aesop's fables still exist. It's a reason that fairy tales that are centuries old, we are still telling to our kids because we know deep in our hearts, whether we're consciously aware of it or not, we know that these are the things that affect our behavior. I will never forget the ways in which my dad telling me the little boy who cried wolf has affected what I will and won't do. The storytelling is an incredibly powerful, so it's currency, it's money. It's also the current that will sweep your people up, right? So one of the most valuable things that you can do during and after a merger, if you've acquired another company, start telling them not just trust is one of our core values, but let me tell you a story about Doug. And here's what I saw Doug do that was just such a profound example of trust in Una that I just want everybody to know about what Doug did. That is going to draw people into that current, into that river every time you bring new people together. It's a little bit of a war of contagions. Are your behaviors going to rub off on us, or are our behaviors going to rub off on you? If you are the greater storyteller, then you are going to have the greater currency, the greater contagion. Your culture will win the day if you are telling the more poignant, the more specific stories of behavior.
I love that. And I think telling a story and keep on telling stories. And I think that will lead to keeping people engaged. Una, before we go into gratitude, any more questions from you?
On the story note, I was curious if you had a story about a CEO and a company that you helped that truly saw a change that sustained. I'm sure there's plenty, but I'm curious if there's a story that really sticks out that, you know, the first thing that comes to mind right now as you're thinking, what is such a story?
Well, I've told you about the CEO who said we're walking on eggshells, right? And now they're telling each other what they need to hear. I can think also of a business leader who hired us because there was so much conflict in his leadership team meetings that he would literally sometimes before those meetings puke from the anxiety of what was going to happen in that meeting. We put the team through this training that I've told you about that includes that exercise. That includes 4 principles of effective communication, collaboration, and leadership. 4 out of the 8, by the way, that we train teams in. So they got half of the goods. And everybody on the team really lapped it up, except for one guy who said that was a waste of time. It was really touchy-feely. I can't believe we did that. His behavior changed anyway. And that's actually a story we've heard from a number of leaders. Everybody loved it except this guy, or everybody loved it except for these couple people. And their behavior changed anyway. And then also what happened is that some of the rest of the team learned some Aikido, right? No surprise. The guy who thought it was too touchy-feely is also kind of a focus point of a lot of that conflict. And people learn to take his aggression and just not be hit by it. And so what that leader told us just months later was he's no longer puking before meetings. He's looking forward to his meetings. And then 9 months later, when he was thinking, I'm going to have to fire this guy, the environment had become uncomfortable, so uncomfortable for this center of conflict that he had left voluntarily before he could fire him. What we find again and again is that the people you want to keep on your team get more and more comfortable, feel more and more safe, are having more and more fun. And the people that you're not sure it was a good idea to hire them in the first place, those folks become more and more uncomfortable, and the environment becomes one that they can't tolerate, and they leave, and goodbye. No problem. Thank you for playing.
That's great. Aaron, our podcast is produced by Hey Taco, which is our company. And if you're not familiar with Hey Taco, everybody has 5 tacos to give each day. And you can give your tacos to someone to recognize them for something they've done, or to simply just to show your appreciation. Who are you giving your 5 tacos to today and why?
I love that. And I had the opportunity to recommend that a CEO check out Hey Taco just last Friday. So just like three days ago, we were talking about how to give appreciation to remote teams. And so maybe it's cheating, but I'd like to give you a taco, Una, and I'd like to give you a taco, Doug, for having me on and for asking me questions that led me to say things that I love saying and bringing out some new ways of saying some of these things. So appreciation to you. I mentioned that I was coming off of another recording just earlier, and what a fantastic interviewer Cassandra was. So gratitude to Cassandra. So that's 3 tacos. And then I've got a couple of people on my team, Aneth and Enna, who have really been holding down the fort. The last few weeks, I have been so out of pocket that they have had a tremendous amount on their plates. And they've been doing a great job of keeping me where I need to be and keeping things moving forward with our clients and making sure that our clients have not had the experience that we want to prevent, that when I'm not around, that they're not getting what they need. So kudos and tacos, really. Tacos to Aneth and to Enna as well.
That's great. Well, Aaron, thank you for being on our podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for the taco. We don't get them often, but everyone likes to get a taco. So do we. So thank you, Aaron.
Thank you for having me on. It's really been fun.
Thanks for listening. One of the important things about building a team is gratitude. If you're looking to add more gratitude into your team, check out heytaco.com. We are clearly biased, but it really does work. Use the code AMAZINGTEAMS to receive 15% off for the first 3 months of your subscription.